Okay, sorry. I hit the wrong buttons in the wrong order, apparently. I put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Mike Myers, because he's kind of really drifted off in terms of making movies, but that was one of his lines in a movie about flight attendants, I want to say. I'm not sure. Anywho, we are going to do part 2 of the osseous tissue presentation. It's a lot of slides. There's a lot of information. There's no reason that I am pausing. Let's get started. Okay, part 2 begins with the question, what is the difference between intramembranous ossification and endochondrial ossification? You can't see the face I'm making, but what am I saying? Well, let's break this down. Ossification is the formation of bone, so that's easy. Intramembranous would mean in between membranes, and endochondral would be within cartilage. So what is the difference between in between membrane bone formation and within the cartilage bone formation is the question. These are the two ways that we form bone in the human body. Human bones grow until about the age of 25. Most growth diminishes greatly after puberty, especially in females. But females typically tend to grow until around 20, 21-ish. And males typically develop until 25. Osteogenesis is bone formation, and ossification is the process of replacing other tissues with bone. Calcification is the process of depositing calcium salts, so that hydroxyapatite, which is the calcium phosphorus mixture, and occurs during bone ossification and in other tissues. The two main forms of ossification are that intramembranous ossification between the membranes and that endochondrial or within cartilage ossification. Intramembranous ossification is also called dermal ossification. So this occurs in the dermis. It produces dermal bones, such as the mandible, which is part of your mouth, and the clavicle, which is your collarbone. There are 3 main steps to intramembranous ossification. Now you have to think that for a majority of what we are about to talk about, this is happening at the embryonic stage. So it's happening in utero as you are an embryo, because most fetal structures are already completely in place by 14 weeks, which is the end of the first trimester. So after 14 weeks, the main job of the fetus is just to grow larger and larger, but all of its bones, its organs, its skin, everything is already in place by then. So these 3 main steps in intramembranous ossification is an embryo thing. But step 1, mesenchymal cells aggregate, which means that non-differentiated embryonic stem cells of the middle layer come together. And then they differentiate into osteoblasts. And as we know from the last presentation, a blast is an immature cell. The blasts begin ossification at an ossification center, which they'll be drawn to due to chemicals or whatever in the area, and they develop projections called spicules. So, step 1, mesenchymal cells aggregate, differentiate, and begin the ossification process. The bone expands as a series of spicules that spread into the surrounding tissues. So you have the aggregating mesenchymal cells that will differentiate into an osteoblast. They start to deposit what will be the matrix of the bone, and they do it in these projections, which they call spicules here. And look, there's a blood vessel, and here's your osteoblasts forming all around the edge here. And here's a blood vessel, see that there? So none of this is actually bone yet. Step 2, the blood vessels grow into the area to supply these osteoblasts. The spicules connect, trapping the blood vessels inside the bone. So these osteoblasts have already, over here, you can see that they have turned into mature osteocytes and lacunae, and these blood vessels are now trapped. So this is where the blood vessel will remain for its entirety of the human life. And here's your osteoblast layer on the outside. Spongy bone develops and is remodeled into osteons of compact bone, periosteums, or marrow cavities. So over time, the bone assumes the structure of spongy bone. Areas of spongy bone may later be removed, creating marrow cavities. So marrow, remember, is where red blood cell production is and or where fat deposits are, depending on if it's red or yellow marrow. Through remodeling, spongy bone formed in this way can be converted to compact bone. And so this would be more of your compact bone structure. See all the blood vessels running through it and everything. I'm going to read to you the steps of intramembranous ossification as labeled out in the handout that I have posted for you in your class. This type of bone formation occurs in a fibrous membrane. Embryonic mesenchymal cells differentiate into osteoblasts and form a center of ossification. The osteoblasts secrete a collagen fiber matrix where mineral salts are deposited, and then that forms the lacunae. The outermost cells form a periosteum from which new bone is formed. Inner trapped cells are called osteocytes. The formed bones grow in size by the addition of tissue to its surface, a process called appositional growth. Growth in length takes place by the addition of bones to the ends of the diaphysis. Growth in thickness occurs by depositing of subperiosteal bone on the external surface of the diaphysis and is removed to the inner surface. By the end of this PowerPoint presentation, you need to know what all those words mean. Oops. And so that is intramembranous, between membranes. Endochondrial ossification starts out everything as hyaline cartilage, and then that is replaced by bone. So ossifies bone that originates as hyaline cartilage. Just so you know, most bones originate as hyaline cartilage. So this is the more common form of ossification. So how do the bones grow and form? Well, this is 6 steps instead of 3. Look at this picture as being the beginning of a humerus or a femur, okay? Step 1 is chondrocytes, so cartilage cells, in the center of the hyaline cartilage enlarge. They form struts and calcify. And then they die, leaving cavities in the cartilage. Step 1, as the cartilage enlarges, chondrocytes near the center of the shaft greatly increase in size. The matrix is reduced to a series of small struts, which I'm not really sure what we mean by struts, but we can assume it means layers, that soon begin to calcify. The enlarged chondrocytes then die and disintegrate, leaving cavities within the cartilage. So that's step 1. Chondrocytes enlarge, and then they die, leaving cavities in the cartilage. Step 2, blood vessels grow around the edges of the cartilage. Cells in the perichondrium, so around the cartilage, change to osteoblasts, producing a layer of superficial bone around the shaft, which will continue to grow and become compact bone. And we'll talk about oppositional growth in a minute. So the perichondria, because it's still cartilage at this point, is around the cartilage is what that means. Blood vessels start to grow into the perichondria, and osteoblasts form along the edges, and they start to deposit these layers of bone along the edges. Here you can see all the holes in the bone left behind by the dead cartilage cells, chondrocytes. Then blood vessels enter the cartilage, bringing fibroblasts that become osteoblasts, and spongy bone develops at the primary ossification center. So that area where the chondrocytes were that had died off, all those openings that they left become the start of spongy bone. Fibroblasts migrate in with the blood vessels and start to deposit bone within the enzyme inside of the diaphysis, forming osteoblasts. And then you still have bone formation happening along the outside. That center cavity is eventually remodeled, creating the marrow cavity where red blood cells or fats will be stored. And the bone replaces cartilage at the metaphysis. So the metaphysis, so you have the diaphysis, epiphysis, words, epiphyseal, epiphysis, something like that. And then the metaphysis is the area in between the diaphysis and the epiphyseals, epiphysis, where growth occurs here and here, so on the top and the bottom. And then we replace, that center is remodeled so it's open. Capillaries and osteoblasts then enter the epiphysis, creating secondary ossification centers, and the same steps are going to occur here, where you have the blood vessels run along the outside, you get a little bit of bone deposition on the outside, the blood vessels migrate in, they carry those fibroblasts within, the fibroblasts start depositing or turn into osteoclasts and start depositing bone on the epiphysis. The epiphyses fill with spongy bone. Cartilage within a joint cavity is articulation cartilage, and cartilage at the metaphysis is epiphyseal cartilage. So you have articular cartilage on the outside of your joints where they bind, where they are to be connected to the joint hinge or whatever kind of joint you have. And then inside you have epiphyseal cartilage that separates the epiphysis from the diaphysis. So here's a stained micrograph showing the epiphyseal cartilage matrix, and you can see all the chondrocytes and like the hyaline cartilage. And then there's like this kind of line here, this border, and then you start getting the spongy bone marrow cavity and bone deposits here. Appositional growth is when compact bone thickens and strengthens along bone with those circumferential lamellae, the layers, the circles of layers of lacunae and osteocytes around a Haversian canal. So blood vessels grow around the edges of the cartilage. Oh, no. Oh, what's this down here? No. What's that? Oh, sorry. Well, okay, anyway, that's what appositional growth means. This isn't the right picture, I believe, for this. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything. I'm missing everything. No, okay, good. What are the characteristics of adult bones? When you stop growing at 21-ish to 25-ish, you leave behind evidence that you were growing at one point, and we call these epiphyseal lines. And so here's cartilage, where you have the epiphyseal plates and the metaphyseal plates, but then you have these epiphyseal lines, and they're thin lines, and you can kind of barely see them. This one's more straight across here. You can kind of barely see them. Oh, there's a really good one right there. And these lines indicate an area where you were creating new osteoblasts, that were creating new bone that no longer occurs. When long bones stop growing after puberty, your epiphyseal cartilage disappears and you get this epiphyseal line. There are many disorders that can occur in the human body. Some of them are hormonal, some of them are genetic, that lead to acromegaly, which is gigantism, basically. It's large limbs, essentially, is what that turns into, acromegaly. The tallest man in the world never stopped growing, and I want to say he was 8'11" by the Guinness Book of World Records, and he died at the age of 22, because your body, your heart specifically, cannot support that size of a human being. So he had lots of other issues with his gigantism, but the heart does eventually give out. which is something that we see. I know that we aren't dogs, I get it, but we breed dogs as a society, and you get those really, really large dog breeds like Irish Wolfhounds and Great Danes. And Irish Wolfhounds and Great Danes do not live very long lives. They typically don't even live to a decade because their body size is so hard to support. Their hearts typically give out. Matured bones, as long bones mature, osteoclasts, the one that breaks down the bone, enlarge the marrow cavity, and osteons form around blood vessels and compact bone. So we break down that central cavity, and then you get those circular layers of bone structure happening around all the blood vessel perforations that you have in the bone. Those osteons are formed. In the bone, your blood vessels always come in a single pair of large blood vessels. They enter the diaphysis through nutrient foramen. Remember, foramen means a hole. The femur has more than one pair, of course. Metaphyseal vessels supply the epiphyseal cartilage where bone growth occurs, but eventually that cartilage does disappear when you stop growing, so those vessels will disappear too. And periosteal vessels provide blood to the superficial osteons and the secondary ossification centers, which is not anything that we're going to talk about. The periosteum, the outer layer, that layer that is cartilage, fibrocartilage, and then the inside layer, which is osteoblasts, so the outside of the bone. They have networks of lymphatic vessels and sensory nerves as well, just so you know. So how does the skeletal system remodel and maintain homeostasis? And what are the effects of nutrition, hormone, exercise, and aging on bone? So our next topic. The adult skeleton maintains itself and replaces mineral reserves. Remember, I've already told you, once a decade, you're a whole new skeleton. Remodeling recycles and renews the bone matrix and involves the osteocytes to break, the adult living cells to maintain the bone, the osteoblasts to form new bone, and the osteoclasts to degrade, or find a better word for degrade, bone. You should know that bone continually remodels, recycles, and replaces. The turnover rate varies. If deposition is greater than removal, bones get stronger. If removal is faster than replacement, bones get weaker. When you exercise, you stress the bones. When you lift weights, when you pound on the pavement, you're putting stress on your bones. This causes bones to become thicker and stronger. That stress response makes them deposit more bone. So the mineral recycling we do allows bones to adapt to stress, mineral recycling, sorry, and that heavily stressed bone will become thicker and stronger. However, bone degenerates really quickly. We see this in patients who are bedridden for a long time, maybe months of COVID or whatever, but they get up and they're really weak and it's hard for their bones to move and they need to rebuild body and bone strength. So up to a third of bone mass can be lost in a few weeks of inactivity. I don't know if you know, but in the space station up there, they have to exercise more than 2 hours a day to try to maintain bone mass, and they still come back having lost some no matter how much they exercise. That's due to the effects of not having a heavy gravity. So the key concept there is what you don't use, you lose. Stress applied to bones during physical activity are essential to maintain bone strength and mass. You're supposed to be working out is essentially what that sentence just said. Normal bone growth and maintenance requires nutritional and hormonal factors. You want a dietary source of calcium and phosphate. Your body doesn't just spontaneously create the nutrients it needs. You have to ingest them. We are heterotrophs. I was about to say hermaphrodites, which is a totally different thing, but we are heterotrophs. Plus, we also need a small amount of magnesium, fluoride, iron, and manganese to support our bones. The hormone side of it, we have a hormone called calcitriol, made in the kidneys. It helps absorb calcium and phosphorus but you have to have the help of the sun because you have to have vitamin D to do all of this. You gotta have the vitamin D. Make sure you're getting enough vitamin D. As a country, we don't, by the way, and so you might need to take a vitamin D supplement. Also, vitamin C is required for collagen synthesis and stimulates osteoblast differentiation. Vitamin A stimulates osteoblast activity. Vitamins K and B12 help synthesize bone proteins. Vitamin K also helps with clotting. B12 gives you energy. Vitamin C is so you don't get scurvy. You can actually overdose on vitamin A and cause very serious damages, so be careful with your vitamin A intake. I guarantee whatever you're getting in your diet is not going to do it, but if you start taking supplements, be careful. Other hormones include the growth hormone thyroxine. Ooh, there's a fun name for a baby. That stimulates bone growth. Your estrogens and your androgens stimulate osteoblasts. And calcitonin and parathyroid hormone regulate calcium and phosphate levels, among all the other things they do. So here is a table of the hormones that control bone deposition and bone recycling here. Your skeleton is a calcium reserve. If you are low on calcium, your body will start eating your your skeleton to supply the body. You're 99% calcium, 4% potassium, which is over 100%, but whatever. Oh no, here's the bone. 39% calcium, 0.2, 0.7, 0.5% of those things, carbonate 9.8, and 17% phosphate. And then all your cartilage and stuff over there. Calcium is not only used in the bone. That's why if you're low on calcium, they will take it out of the bone because you need it for membranes. You need it for neurons specifically. If you're low on calcium, usually goes along with being low on vitamin C, but you'll start bleeding randomly from your membranes, from your eyes, from your ears, from your mouth, from your nose, because you don't have the proper ions in place for the membranes to be functioning properly, so you start bleeding. Neurons, your ability for your nerves to fire and move your body, mostly all those involuntary muscles that we don't know that we're moving, you need calcium for that, and muscle cells, especially the heart cells. Go drink a glass of milk right now. I'll wait. Or you could just pause me. Excellent. Chug that milk. Calcium ions in body fluids must be closely regulated. We have buffer systems in our blood that will take up calcium if we have too much of it. Homeostasis is maintained by calcitonin and parathyroid hormone, which controls storage, absorption, and excretion. If you need to be reminded, bones are where calcium is stored, digestive tract is where calcium is absorbed, and kidneys is where calcium is excreted from. So the parathyroid hormone actually has a whole lot to do with lots of things. But let's say that you need it to increase your blood calcium levels. Your rate of intestinal absorption will increase. Your kidneys will start to retain calcium ions, so you won't pee them out. And your bone will break down. Your osteoclast will break down your bone if you need more calcium's ions in the blood. Parathyroid is produced by the parathyroid hormone is produced by the parathyroid glands in the neck. I hope that wasn't something that needed to be said. And those are the three things we just described as how it increases calcium levels. To decrease calcium levels, we start to pee out the calcium, we stop absorbing so much calcium, and we build bone to take it out of blood. So there you go. Calcium and phosphate ions in blood are lost in urine. Ions must be replaced to maintain homeostasis. If not obtained from the diet, ions are removed from the skeleton, weakening the bones. Exercise and nutrition keep bones strong. Yay. Let's see something. Yeah, all right. Fractures is fine. What are the types of fractures and how do they heal? Fractures are fun, fascinating little things. You've learned about them before. You'll learn about them in EMT for those of you in there. You can break your bones in lots of fun, fancy ways. But the point is that you don't typically always break the bone. A clean break is a rare event. You typically have all sorts of different kinds of cracks in the bone. caused by physical stress, and these are fractures. Fractures are repaired in 4 steps. There's your crack in the bone. That's not a happy fracture. But extensive bleeding occurs because your bones are vascularized. Also, they hurt because you're innervated as well. Over a period of several hours, a large blood clot or fracture hematoma develops, okay? So you kind of want that to happen. This establishes that fibrous network because remember, specifically, blood also is a connective tissue. And one of the things blood can do is it can clot up by forming fibers. So you establish a fibrous network. The bone cells in the area die, and an internal callus forms, which will unite a network of spongy bone over the inner edges, and cartilage and bone stabilize the outer edge. So you get new spongy bone here. You see new spongy bone and cartilage out here on either side of the fracture start to form. That periosteum is still pushed out from that original fracture hematoma. The cells of the endosteum and the periosteum migrate into the fracture zone. Oh, we just saw this. But the external callus surrounds the break, and internal callus develops into marrow cavities. That, just like regular endochondral ossification, that's what's going to happen here as well. So this area was cartilage formed by a fibrous network that is replaced by bone, and now struts of spongy bone, unite in the broken ends. Fragments of dead bone in the areas of bone closest to the break have been removed and replaced. There you go. And then the initial swelling that marks a swelling, you have that fracture hematoma that marks the place of where the fracture occurred. Over time, this region will be remodeled. So, you know, over a decade perhaps, and little evidence of the fracture will remain. How do we fracture? Oh, there's so many ways. We're very inventive in our fractures. You got your POTS fracture, occurs in the ankle and affects both bones of the legs. Here's the fracture here in the tibia, and here's the fracture here in the fibula. I will admit this is not a great x-ray to show you these fractures, but you can see the breaks in the bone there. You have comminuted fractures where the bone has been jammed into itself and it kind of shatters into shards. This is fracture of the femur. That is difficult to do, by the way. Your femur is the biggest bone in your body. Shatter the affected area into a multitude of bony fragments. That's a bad one. Those are the types of fractures that you don't want. Transverse fractures actually go all the way through and they break the shaft, the diaphysis of a bone. Spiral fractures are also very bad because you can see all the jagged edges that are left. But this is from twisting. You actually twist that bone to the point of breaking it. You exceed its stress limit. This is a tibia. So down here is the ankle, and here's the fibula, and then up there will be a knee eventually. Produced by twisting stresses that spread along the leaves of the bone. So imagine planting your foot in football and then trying to spin around to catch the ball, but not moving your leg. If you do that severely enough, you can cause something like this spiral fracture. Displaced fractures are where the bone is completely broken, but then due to pressure or stress or something, the bone has actually been shifted up or down from where it's supposed to be. So that produces a new and abnormal bone arrangement. Displaced fractures retain the normal alignment of where the bone should have been, but in a different spot. Here is, once again, a tibia. Apparently tibias break a whole lot. Actually, is that a tibia? Yeah, I think so. Cole's fracture is not one I am familiar with, so let's read. A break in the distal portion of the radius, typically the result of reaching out to cushion a fall. Okay, well, I've done that before. I've not broken my wrist, but you know when you're falling and you put your hand out to stop your face from hitting the ground? If you fractured it doing that, apparently is called a Cole's fracture, specifically if you fracture the radius here. And I'm trying to, it's not this. We're pointing to this, so this must be the fracture right here. Green stick fracture is an incomplete fracture. happens in young children. The reason it's called green stick is because imagine pulling a small twig off a tree, but the tree was a really, really healthy tree, and you twist the stick and you twist the stick and you twist it, trying to get it to break, and it never actually does because that tree was so healthy and green on the inside. That's where the word green stick fracture comes from. Anyway, such as this fracture of the radius, only one side of the shaft is broken and the other is bent. You can see that little bulge right there indicating a bend. This type of fracture generally occurs in children whose long bones have yet to fully ossify. Epiphyseal fractures are fractures along the growth plate of a bone. It tends to occur where the bone matrix is undergoing calcification and chondrocytes are dying. A clean transverse fracture along this line generally heals well. Unless carefully treated, fractures between the epiphysis and the epiphyseal cartilage can permanently stop growth at this site. And so, but it won't stop growth at, say, the other leg or the other arm, so you'll end up with a short arm, long arm, or short leg, long leg. Compression fractures suck, and they're stress fractures from your bones pushing down on each other. So this is vertebrae, such as those forces produced that arise when you land on your seat in a fall. So imagine falling on your behind and all the weight from your neck, shoulders, and upper back crushing those lumbar vertebrae of your spine when you fall down. You can cause stress fractures. It's very painful. Let's say you don't fracture anything and you get to the ripe old age of, I don't know, 33. I don't know why I would say that number, but whatever. So what are the effects the aging has on the skeletal system? Well, we already know that the number one effect is osteoporosis. That typically happens to females because the estrogens in our body leach calcium out of our bones during menopause. So that's something to look forward to. But what else can happen? Bones become thinner and weaker with age. That is a true story. Osteopenia, or small bones, or little lack of, that's what that means, lack of bone, begins between the ages of 30 and 40. Seriously? Like already? Like, come on, man. Women lose 8% of bone mass per decade, while men lose 3%. Good on you, men. The effects of bone loss, the epiphysis, vertebrae, and jaws are most affected, resulting in fragile limbs, reduction in height, and tooth loss. My poor grandmother. I didn't see her in maybe the last 4 or 5 years of her life, but before then she was so shrunk and hunched over. Like, she had been like a 6 foot tall woman, and when I knew her, she was about 3 feet tall, not even joking. She had shrunk so much, and her body was completely hunched over. She would have to, when she walked, her head was facing straight down, so she would have to turn her head sideways and up to be able to look at you. Oh, that poor lady. And then, eventually she was bedridden with dementia and finally passed. Her body held on a lot longer than we expected it to. Anyway, so reduction in height and then tooth loss as well. Osteoporosis is severe bone loss. Over the age of 45 occurs in 29% of women and 18% of men. Men is probably a dietary thing. Our estrogens and androgens help maintain bone mass, but bone loss in women accelerates after menopause because we don't really produce so much of the estrogens anymore. We also have a hormone that apparently is not estrogen that leaches calcium from our bones, and I don't know which one it is. Cancer. Osteosarcomas are some of the most aggressive cancers on the planet. Thankfully, they're fairly rare in terms of cancer. I mean, many people die from them yearly, but they're very, very fast-acting cancers. They move very quickly, so they metastasize very quickly. Cancerous tissues release osteoclast activating factor that produces severe osteoporosis in bones as well. What? That was it? That's how we ended? We ended on cancer? How sad. Okay, well, that is your osseous tissue PowerPoint. There's a ton of information here. And this is only the start of the skeletal system. So study well, my friends, and I'll see you in class.